Hello, good afternoon. My name is Kimberly Ellman. I am the manager of National Mentorship Programming at Best Friends Animal Society. And I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to spend some time with us discussing leading through change. We're going to speak with 4 industry leaders today who are going to share real world, tangible content and experiences that shelter leadership can use to positively affect change within your organizations and also create a culture that sustains life-saving programmatic changes. Let's go ahead and introduce our wonderful panelists. First, I will start with Shelley Delahousie. Shelley is the shelter supervisor at Lafayette Animal Shelter and Care Center. They're a municipal agency in Lafayette, Louisiana. Hello, Shelley, welcome. I do want to let everybody know she's having some tornado watch issues going on right now. So stay safe, Shelley, and hopefully we won't lose you, but your safety is most important. Next, we have Lee Harper. She's the executive director at Kitsap Humane Society. They are a private organization in Silverdale, Washington. And if you don't know where Silverdale is, it's a little bit over an hour outside of Seattle. So welcome, Lee. Thank you so much for participating.
Good to be here.
Thank you. Next, we have Scott Giacopo, the Director of National Shelter Support at Best Friends Animal Society. And I'll let you in on a little secret. He's also my supervisor. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate you participating. And then last but not least, we have Holly Sizemore, our Chief Mission Officer at Best Friends Animal Society. Thanks, Holly, for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you on one of my panels.
Thank you. Sorry for the holdup.
You are fine. All right, let's jump in since we are running a few minutes behind. I want to start by talking about creating positive change internally within the shelter. Holly, I'm going to come to you first because you have helped lead Best Friends through not only programmatic changes over the last several years, but organizational changes as well. You also happen to be a change management expert, and you've given presentations at both regional and national conferences on the subject. So to start, let's share with our audience about how you identify what actually needs to change.
Thank you. A lot of times the changes are right in your face, right? And so it's because you've identified some sort of problem or a strategic issue that must be dealt with in order to achieve what you want to now achieve. So a new reality or a new vision. Another way to how to identify what needs to change, one that's not as obvious, because in some ways, for instance, let me give you an example on when we identify a strategic issue that must be dealt with. Like in our sheltering industry, we see more and more shelters saying, we are going to save all the healthy and treatable animals that enter into our shelter. And we weren't able to do that before, but now we feel we can. So that's the strategic issue that must be dealt with. We know we can do it, but we need to make some changes in order to make that new reality happen, right? But then that is the easier way to identify change. Another way that I just say proactively identify change is stop sometimes and test your assumptions. Sit down and ask your team, are we doing this because we've always done it this way? What are some of the biases that we may have? And so challenging yourself in a more proactive way can sometimes shed light on change efforts that can sneak up on you that you're not even aware of.
Excellent answer. You're right. Thinking about our own biases and assumptions that we make and may not even be consciously aware of. Scott, do you have anything you want to add to that about how you identify what needs to change?
Yeah, and that's a tough one to follow because Holly nailed it. She usually does. We can talk about data, looking at data, and being able to use data as a way to make decisions on what needs to be changed. But I'd like to take Holly's point just a little step further. And sometimes we know what's right and what's wrong. And sometimes, and I think back to when I started my career back in the late 80s. I'm not going to, I've been in this for a little while. But I think about some of the things we used to do, and I use adoptions as an example, right? And some agencies still will look at an individual and judge them on how much money they make or what neighborhood they live in. And we know that's not right. Mm-hmm. Or field officers taking people's animals away from them. We know that's not right. And that's a change that we need to make, that we all need to make. So it's sometimes it goes beyond data and sitting there thinking about, how can we do things better and all that. Sometimes it's just a matter of what's right and what's wrong. and recognizing that and being able to sit back and say, this is wrong.
Mhm.
Let's change it.
Excellent point. Thank you, Scott. Okay, I'm moving to our two external shelter leaders for this next question. Lee, I'm going to start with you, and then Shelley, I will have you follow up when Lee is finished. This is a two-part question. Explain why it's important to create a sense of urgency around change that is needed in the shelter. And how do you do this? This is the important part. And how do you do this without creating anxiety for your staff around that urgency, if you will? Lee, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Well, the first thing I do is I think about like how many urgency cards can I use in 1 year? And is this a change that needs one of those cards? Because everything can't be urgent. And this has been something that I have learned painfully along the way, because I'm like, let's do it. We can make it happen tomorrow, whatever the change is and whatever the ripple effect is. And I've learned by making a lot of mistakes along the way that doesn't often work, especially if you're not really laying the groundwork and affecting people and supporting them through that change. So we just had a change recently that it's urgent, but not like our mask mandate finally lifted in Washington. And so we want to make masks optional, assuming the numbers stay low, but it's already changed. And we said, we're not ready for that. But we also want to fully open the shelter again. And we decided we couldn't do both those changes at the same time. And the most important one was getting people back in the door, fully back in. And so that starts next week. And then in 2 more weeks after that, we're taking masks off. Would I have loved to rip our masks off and make them optional 3 weeks ago? Yep. But it was like, that was just going to produce too much anxiety. But whenever possible, I've learned to slow down and sort of tiptoe into change when it's possible, even though that goes against kind of how I really want the change to happen. And especially being new, I'm new into the field, I'm not new as an executive director, but it's just really important to kind of go slow when you can. And if not, just really be clear about what you need to do, why you're doing it, and how you can support people through that.
Excellent. So basically, don't be the boy that cried wolf all the time, because then people stop listening. So excellent point. Shelley, as a municipal leader, tell me how you go about creating a sense of urgency around change for your staff, and how do you do this without that anxiety, producing that anxiety for them?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the bottom line for the municipals is literally lives are at stake, so if we don't move fast enough, if we don't try to change what we're doing, that could put animals at risk. And so that's the bottom line. We need to do something right now. But to not create anxiety, which is really hard, because as a municipal, the dogs are still coming in and we still need kennel space. We got to get them out. So there's always a sense of anxiety, but I try to tell the staff, we need to look at things as, is this animal suffering right now? Like, do we have to make a decision on this dog right now? And majority of the time it's not right now. Like, we have some time. We actually can wait 2 weeks. The staff always clown and they make fun of me that my answer is always like, give it 2 weeks. Let's see what happens in 2 weeks. But I mean, it's true. Like, do we really need to make a decision right now? No, let's give it 2 weeks. Let's see if we can get this dog to get along with other dogs. Let's see if we can help its resource guarding. Let's see what we can do. So, and that kind of takes some pressure off, because we do forget in that moment, we want to hurry and make a choice right now because it is urgent, but it's not that urgent. So just taking a step back, like Lee said, and just waiting and seeing what happens.
Thank you. And I think also it helps when you can communicate the why things need to change, the impact, right? How it impacts the animals in your care, the staff, your community. I think impact is important. If you look at adult learning theory, adults need to understand why when you're asking them to do something, particularly when it involves change. But excellent answers. Thank you. Scott, I want to ask you, you mentioned you're a veteran in animal welfare, and as our Director of National Shelter Support, you work cross-functionally with a variety of leaders, middle managers, frontline staff at Best Friends, as well as the shelters that we engage with across the nation. So share with us how you identify the appropriate stakeholders to help guide change, because leaders can't do it alone. They might have the vision, right? But they can't do it alone. How do you identify the appropriate stakeholders to make change happen? And then Holly, I'll have you follow up with any additional thoughts on this question.
Yeah, I think, for me, when I was recommending change, we'll say, when I was talking about my vision for change, and I see how some staff react, right? And I want to grab them as a cheerleader, so to speak, right? And I'll never forget, there was one point when I was part of a major transition, a complete overhaul of an organization. And during one of my first staff meetings, I had a person who had been there for a considerably long time, longer than anyone else in the building had been there. And I thought he was going to be the influencer. But during the meeting, I recognized that people were looking at another person who had only been there for a few years, right? And I realized that, wow, I have this all wrong. He's not the influencer, he is, right? So through open communication and talking to that individual, getting them on board and getting their input, right? I was able to identify that person as being a chief influencer, and I got my cheerleader on board, so to speak. So I think, what I always recommend to shelter leaders is to, look for those people. Look for who is the most influential person, who is really excited about this change. And you can tell, and when I've gone into shelters and I've seen, I've talked to people about the change that the leadership is talking about doing, and you can see them in their body posture. They lean forward, they're getting excited about it, and they oh, and what about this? And so being able to identify those people that you can bring on board early, right, and they'll help you with the rest of the staff.
Thank you. So influencers aren't always about your title at the shelter.
No,
So yeah.
no, not at all.
Yeah,
Or the length of
exactly.
stay, how long you've been
Exactly.
there, anything. And I was really, I learned a valuable lesson that day, and it stuck with me ever since.
It's a very good point. Holly, would you like to add anything about identifying appropriate stakeholders to help guide change?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add is, there's a lot of people out there who can either help or hinder the change. And so it's a great idea just to do, I think many of us know the term SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and you can look at stakeholders in that way. You can kind of just make a list. Who are the stakeholders in this change? Who is this change going to affect the most? But also, who may have the greatest opportunity to really goof up this change? Because sometimes it is, like to Scott's point, internally finding those champions and also addressing the people that do have the most anxiety around the change and giving those people the ability to be heard about what is making them nervous and really working through. To me, I always say change management is just as much about managing the transition, the psychology and the psychological impact as it is going through the mechanics of change. And so really listing out your various stakeholders and trying to identify them. Can they help? Can they hinder? And then you can come up with ways to address each of those, because there's a whole myriad of other ways to then get that buy-in from various stakeholders.
And you're right, there's definitely a psychology to change. And that leads perfectly into my next question for Shelley, and then Lee, I'll have you add anything you'd like to add. So, you can watch a webinar like this on change management, you can take a course, you can read books. There's a big difference between learning about change management and understanding the theory and the research behind it, and then actually engaging staff to change their mindset and ultimately their behaviors, right? So Shelley, what do you do as a municipal leader to help staff embrace change at your agency?
I like to lead by example, so I work right alongside of them. So if, a caretaker is out and everyone's freaking out because how we're going to get the kennels clean, no problem. Like I'm getting my mop and bucket and I'm going at it. And so, we need to go catch these pigs down the street. What are we going to do? I'm there with a net and I'm catching pigs. It's crazy. But so just being alongside of them, working at the same level, setting that example, because I really think people do, they're not going to do what you say, but they'll do what you do. And so if they see me doing the work and they see me adapting to change and they see me as the leader, you know, taking this pandemic and running with it, or any kind of thing that gets thrown at us, and just adapting easily and working through it, they watch me and then hopefully they can mimic my actions.
Excellent answer. Modeling the way is always great from leadership. Lee, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, totally agree with everything Shelley said about modeling the way. I think about communication, and when there's change happening, I think over communication is super important. By the time you roll out the change to the broader staff, you've been thinking about it for months, maybe a year. Your leadership team, the board, they're all on board. But we have to remember, like, other people may not have heard about this. And so it's not just one and done. I send a weekly email out to all of our staff, the board, and a couple hundred of our active volunteers. And I use that as an opportunity to, like, talk about the change, re-talk about the change, remind people they can come. There's an open door policy. And then also, like, hey, if you guys have a better way to do this, bring it to us, because maybe we did screw it up and we didn't come to you as an influencer or somebody who it really affects. We often use a term like, what are the ripple effects, right? So what's going to happen when you make the change, and make sure you talk with those people ahead of time. And if you don't, because you didn't know, like, be open to kind of backtracking and adapting the change strategy.
Very sage advice. Anybody want to add anything before we move on to the next topic?
I loved what Lee said about, like, also, like, you're not going to remember everything about the change. And I love what Lee said, because sometimes you just have to say, oh gosh, sorry, I didn't think of that. And you just need to apologize. I screwed up.
I want to offer what not to do, and because I've seen this and I've actually done it. I've made my mistakes in my career, especially in this regard when I was part of this transition I spoke of earlier. You come in and you look at an employee and the way they're doing their jobs and all that, and then you decide you want to make a change, and you go to them and you say, okay, starting now, you're going to do this instead of that. And you leave it at that. And it speaks to, Holly had mentioned the psychological transition and all that. I never recognized the importance of that. And to really build lasting, sustainable change, you can't just tell someone, stop doing it this way and start doing it that way. And I actually did. And I learned a valuable lesson from that, because it doesn't work. And I believe that I lost some good employees as a result of that.
Thank you for being transparent about that, Scott. It's hard to be self-aware sometimes. So you've obviously done that analysis, and you're right. You have to explain to people why you're asking them to do or not do something. Let's expand a little bit on leading staff through change. And so, Lee, what advice do you have for shelter leaders whose staff are afraid of change? And oftentimes being afraid of change just means being afraid of failure, right? So what advice do you have for shelter leadership whose staff are afraid?
It's interesting when we think about, like, startups in the world, it's all about failure, right? It's all about making mistakes. Research, like, yeah, we got to screw it up to get it right? But in nonprofits, we actually, most of us, I think, at least in my experience, don't have that mentality, when I think it's really important for us to have it. I think we don't have it because we're also like, oh gosh, donors gave us money, and if we mess this up, we're not using, or in a government shelter, Shelley, I can imagine it's like, oh, are we going to end up on the front page if we mess this up, right? So I think we've got to be okay with mistakes, as long as the same mistake is only made once.
Yep.
I think if we can think big but start small, whether it's like starting a new program, like, sure, in 2 years you might want to serve, have 250 fosters, and right now you have 5. Let's not set the goal for 100 in the next 6 months, right? So pilot it, whatever the change is, if you can. You can't always do that, but
Right.
kind of take baby steps with the bigger final change kind of just ahead of you that you're looking out for. And then again, it's just being transparent and being open. And like Holly said, yeah, I made a mistake. Let's backtrack on that and try it differently. So,
Thank
but
you.
I think, yeah, I think the being okay with mistakes, and we just gotta learn to be okay with it as leaders and learn to model that, and also just support our staff when they make mistakes.
Yeah, we're big fans of piloting programs before going big. So that's extremely timely and good advice, Lee. Thank you. You know, a lot of times in animal welfare, we say verbally, yeah, change is good. And then in our inner voice says, but you go first, right? Or, yeah, we'll do that at our agency. But then we're going to look to see what the agency down the road is doing with that and whether they're failing or the repercussions from the community. So you're right. The pilot is a great way to go. All right, Shelley, our staff have been through so many changes in the last 2 years. It seems like every time you turn around, something's changing in animal welfare, right? It's not, and most of it hasn't, let's be honest, most of it hasn't been great. But I think we're coming out of that. So how do you reframe change to avoid your staff mentally burning out on constant change?
Yeah, so I'll never forget the first time that I was just promoted into director, and I went into a meeting. I realized that the dogs weren't moving fast enough to rescue because they weren't heartworm tested. So we had to, spend 2 or 3 days heartworm testing the dogs before we can get them out. So I had a meeting with the staff, and I walked in and I said, okay, we're gonna add heartworm testing into our intake protocol. And literally one of my ACOs like flipped out of her chair, like, I can't heartworm test, I'm an ACO. Like, what are you talking about? And I was like so surprised at that reaction. Like, I didn't think that was going to happen. And, that was like so small in my head, but in her head, that was like a big deal. And so here we are, like you said, 2 years later, we've had so many changes and so much progress that if we're stagnant now and we haven't had anything change, my staff is already starting to think of ideas on their own, which is awesome to me. That's like amazing that they're coming up to me. Hey, don't you think we can do this to get the dogs out faster? Can we do this so that they're healthier? And it's awesome. It's great. But I think, changing the word as, we're constantly changing. We're constantly evolving,
Love it.
we're evolving. We're not, this is a marathon, not a sprint. It's going to constantly change, yes, but it's because we're evolving.
I love that, evolving. I'm going to start using that instead of change. Yeah. Excellent point, Shelley. Holly, do you have anything you want to add about reframing change so staff don't mentally burn out? Because it has been a crazy couple and a half years.
Yeah, I think the last couple of years have been nuts, and there's going to be anxiety and moments of when you're going through change. Part of that transition that I spoke of, the psychological transition, is that there is a time in every change effort, almost always, where your productivity and your confidence goes down. And so to me, one of the best ways to combat some of the stress of change is to simply acknowledge that that is going to be true. To simply say, you guys, I know this change. I know the way we did it. First of all, you honor the past. You don't bash the old way. You just say, we did it this way before. That was the right way with the resources and the knowledge we had in that moment in time. And now there's a better way, or now there's a different way, or we want to explore a new way, because then you sell the problem and go behind the why. But really, so much of it is also taking the time to just tell the staff about the psychology of change, that they're going to feel some grief and loss, that they're probably going to have a lack of productivity and confidence for a while. And it's that moment, what William Bridges, the change management guru, talks about. It's called the neutral zone. In the neutral zone, that is where you're testing and you're failing fast and you're innovating. And that's when the excitement of the chaos. So then gauging people's feelings is so important. Like, that is the most important. Like, okay, so here's the change. And before someone falls back in their chair, you say, I know this may be disconcerting to some. So let's pause now and let's talk. What about this change makes you excited? What about this change makes you nervous? What do you need from us to help you with this change? And what do you feel you can do to help foster this change?
Excellent point. As Lee said, communication, right? A lot of it is
Communication, yeah, and over communication. I love that when Lee said over communicating. And you have to, I think, good change efforts communicate things in a variety of ways, because saying it once in a staff meeting isn't enough. You need something in writing, then you need it in the staff meeting, then you need, you know, each manager to also do it. You may want an FAQ or a town hall. You know, I think some people get very attached to the one way they are most comfortable communicating. And in a change effort, you need to make sure you communicate in a variety of ways.
You're absolutely correct about that. They say it takes someone, hearing something 7 times for it to really sink in. So your point is well taken and noted. Scott, you were the chief of field services in the District of Columbia for 10 years. So what is most difficult about leading during change and challenging times, and how should one handle that difficulty as a leader?
Well, I think, one of the things I recognized, and it kind of, again, speaks to Holly's psychological transition and building up that confidence. And, I've helped implement a lot of change. And what happens, what we notice is when, particularly an animal control officer, I'll use that as an example, is doing something new, and they're getting their legs under them, so to speak, with this new way of doing things. And they hit a challenge and an obstacle. And they tend to revert back to what's normal, what's comfortable, right? Their muscle memory of how they've always handled this type of complaint. And then, if it's not nipped in the bud, so to speak, then it continuously slides. Then that challenge line draws back and back and back until they're going back to the way they used to do it. It's like, well, this new way isn't working. Right. So I think, to the points that were made, failure has to be accepted and understood and tolerated. But, showing the staff members that you are, you're there for them, giving them the support, letting them know that the failure is optional, is okay. And giving them the tools they need to overcome those challenges and feel comfortable saying, gosh, this is something I'm not quite comfortable with yet. Even a veteran officer of 10, 15, 20 years, right? It feels uncomfortable for a change. And letting them know that you're there for them and giving them the support and showing them, okay, this might be a way of handling that situation when you hit that challenge. So for me, it was always about, watching that and making sure that they didn't revert back to the way that they're comfortable with, and helping support them in their growth and change.
And I like how you said making it okay to fail or not be as successful as you wanted to be. And I think as humans, all of us in animal welfare, we want to do as much as we can for as many animals as possible. And we're not good about taking care of ourselves, and we're not good at stepping back and looking at things because we're always in go mode. So I like that you gave your officers that option. Thank you. I want to focus a few questions on building a sustainable culture that thrives during change. We talk a lot about culture in animal welfare, and I think there's room for improvement in many ways. So Holly, again, as our change management expert that has taken best friends through organizational changes, and we've evolved our culture, what is organizational culture? Explain it to the audience, and why is culture critical in animal welfare?
So the definition of culture, I know the last panel you had me on, I had this really good answer for that question, and I don't have it on my notes today. This is the thing about culture. It's a reflection, to me, the most important, it's this reflection of our values and the way that we show up every day to work. And you often hear that cliche, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah.
But I think it's a little more nuanced than that, in that strategy drives culture and culture drives strategy. And so a lot of what I love when you're particularly looking at culture as it relates to a change effort is to ask the team. It's a perfect time to engage with the staff and ask them questions. And you tell them, look, we know this plan isn't perfect. It has some uncertainties. It's okay. You're going to feel uncertain. You might fail. That's okay. We're going to support you. and seek your commitment along the way and your input as to the how. And so I love it when we look at change as okay, what did we do well in the change? Celebrate those victories, because that is often good. That's what makes change stick. Acknowledge when you make a mistake, celebrate the victories, and be willing to make changes to your plan. I think one of the biggest mistakes I see leaders make is that they get too stuck on their plan, and they're not as open to turning on a dime and making small changes so that the larger change is more effective.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And also, I don't think we celebrate our successes or our wins enough. I think we keep moving, working the plan, right? And you got to celebrate those wins and those successes. I think it's very important psychologically, as well as from a cultural perspective.
And you bring up a good point, Kimberly, because I think that when we create that plan, we have to say, what are some quick wins that we can help, that you put in the beginning of your plan so that the team feels a sense of celebration. Oh, this works. And then they're like, oh, we can do this. So it's up to us to make sure that we create and celebrate those quick wins.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Shelley, it sounds like you're doing that at Lafayette, because now your team is evolving and coming up with their own ideas for things. And I have to give you a shout out, because you started out as an adoption counselor. Within a year, you were promoted to shelter supervisor. And within 3 years, you took your municipal agency from a 47% save rate to over 90%. So congratulations. That is no easy feat. So walk us through, particularly now, the last couple of years, since things have been up and down consistently, how you're investing equal time in building your culture at the shelter versus life-saving strategies. How are you divvying up your time as a leader?
Yeah, it's hard to balance, and I'm not gonna act like I know how to do it all, because I don't. But I think once you actually do get your culture where you want it to be, life-saving almost comes naturally. You know, you've already got that mindset. Everyone's ready, on board, like, we're getting it. And so that takes time, and there's a lot of staff turnover to get to that point. I think just building the staff that you want, they're either on board with this new culture and the way that we're working, or they're not. And so it's really hard to either get them, grow them up, or grow them out, you know. And so it's one of those things where, I mean, when I started, like you said, when I was an adoption coordinator, there was 20 people here. There's only 3 that are still here today that was here when I started. So that's a lot of people that either couldn't come up or they had to leave. And so, you know, it was rough in the beginning, because especially as a leader, you think that you're failing, like these people are breaking up with me, like they're leaving me, like a relationship type thing. Am I the failure? But really, it's just that old mentality. It's really hard for them to get out of it. And so if they don't come out of it, this is not working. And so they have to find something else. But the good thing is there's always new people that are coming in. And if you can get your culture right, that new staff, you know, they build up the new ones. You know, you just hire for good people skills and soft skills, and then your staff that are already there are going to help to keep that culture going.
Absolutely. You're so right. That culture helps drive and sustain life-saving, right? It can't happen without a healthy culture. So I appreciate you pointing that out. Lee, you've only been with Kitsap Humane for about a year now. Like you said, you have 20 years, I believe, in executive leadership experience, but a year in animal welfare and with Kitsap as the executive director. So talk us through how you invest time in building your culture, because obviously the culture has changed a little, right? When you came in, right? You might have seen things that you wanted to do differently. How are you building that versus life-saving strategies? And if you wouldn't mind, if you could just take a moment to also talk, I hear you have come up with some for the audience, Kitsap again is a private organization, right? It's not a municipal agency, but Lee has come up with a creative way to fund staff compensation. So if you could just throw a little idea out for our private shelters here, that would be great too, Lee.
Yeah, so one of the things that allows me to spend time building culture is we have a fantastic leadership team. There's seven of us, including me. Because it's a solid team, like high performing team, it gives me the opportunity to focus a lot of my energy on that change. And how do I, first it was, okay, where do I see the need for change? And second, how do we make that happen? And that might mean, talking with our director of animal welfare first to make sure she's on board and what her concerns are. And she's an influencer, right? So
Right.
if Sarah is on board, I know her team's on board. And it's just modeling, we've talked about this. I'm really positive and I'm super collaborative and I'm incredibly open to feedback and people visiting. And I walk around every day in the shelter and I know every single one of our 65 staff. And that's just deeply important to me as a leader. And the things I'm trying to change is it's how do we become more collaborative and break down those barriers? Hey, this is my lane, I want you to stay out of it.
Right.
Which every organization has to some extent. We have a long history of that. And so it's taken a while, right? Because the leadership team is not used to making decisions that affect the whole organization. They were used to the ED saying, hey, here's what we're going to do and here's why. So I'm sort of forcing them in a good way to be involved in organizational decisions. And we're getting there. We're definitely getting there. So in terms of like, how did we fund the change in compensation, paying people more, giving part-time staff holidays and vacation pay, which we hadn't done before, increasing the holidays, increasing other benefits. We've had several really, really good years, even throughout COVID, thanks to PPP and the employee retention credit that has come back to us. So we made a decision to invest some of those dollars, and because we were having high turnover too, and it's like, hey, how do we retain the staff that are here and how do we attract new staff? So it became a question of, if we don't do this, we can't do our mission. So those allowed us to make it happen. And then we also just are looking at how do we spend some of our reserves of the next couple of years while we balance out like what's the next earned income strategy. So, and we also talk about it more with the board, like, hey, do you know what people were getting paid and why the budget is growing this much in 2022? And they're like, oh, we didn't know, right? And like a lot of nonprofits, we're super lean and I need us to be less lean. So we're also hiring more staff to make sure we can get things done and not be exhausted all the time.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. I think there'd be some other leaders on the call that would be interested in hearing those things. So I appreciate you sharing. Scott, share how you think leaders should go about integrating new staff into their shelter's culture, so they're new to the organization.
Yeah, I think when a new staff member comes in, I think they can, like with a good solid culture, united, I think they can actually see it and feel it and live it, and I think that they learn by working alongside others, and we've heard lead by example and so forth. They see that and they fall into it. Right. And I would hope during the hiring process that the philosophical beliefs are the same and that they're on board with the mission and the vision of the organization. And they just, sometimes it just happens naturally. Sometimes. Now, I do want to touch on the fact that within a shelter or an organization, oftentimes there are separate departments. And within each one of those departments, sometimes there are those micro cultures, so to speak. And when a new staff member comes in from one department to the other, sometimes there's an adjustment. And I had a staff member who I was really excited about coming onto my team, and when this individual first came onto the team, we recognized right away that there were some communication differences in the way we communicated, and something like that was, we addressed it right away, open, frank conversations. And I admit, I admitted some of my shortcomings and so forth. And I think that in a very short period of time, it just fell into place, and it's fantastic. And I'm glad to have that person on my team.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Much appreciated. Yep. If you don't define your culture, then the new employees will define it for you, right? So you have to make sure that doesn't happen. Holly, how do you recommend that shelters should communicate their culture, leadership should communicate the culture to staff as well as their communities? Because I think it expands beyond the four walls of the shelter, right?
I think it does. But if you don't have a common understanding within your organization, you're not going to probably be all that successful in sharing that out to the community. So another thing about how to shore up, when you do have new employees, part of the formal orientation should be, here are our values. Like, it's hard to say, here is our culture, because of course the culture is the representation of how we show up with our values every day in the work. So what we can do though is write down the values, share those, and values can be still subjective and kind of vague and sort of hippity dippity. So there was a team member just today I was talking to, and she said, what's working really great on my team is that we've said, we pick a value for that month, one of the core values of Best Friends. And we then ask everyone, just do a quick note of how someone is demonstrating that value in practice on the job. And it's great. Like, so one of them's kindness. And someone says, oh, I saw so-and-so really stop what they were doing to be extra kind to someone who walked in the door, even though they were kind of at a critical juncture in this task. And so that has really helped for us to first understand, what does it actually look like when we're living those values in our work? And then when you talk to your community, it's really about, I think the best way is when the employee leaders can talk all they want about how great their culture is, and no one's going to buy it. But if the employees are the ones saying it, then the community really understands it. And so giving your employees forums, like we do, one of my favorite things at an event we do is we get our animal care workers and some of our highest donors, and we do a Q&A with them. And so we let our donors see the perspectives and the culture and the enthusiasm and the excitement of the people who are saving those lives every day. That's really profound and powerful.
Thank you. I like that. And I love the idea of staff recognizing, other staff for the things they're doing. I've seen shelters do like a kudos wall or a whiteboard and we do this at Best Friends, right? Where you can recognize another staff member, or volunteers can recognize a staff member. And I love seeing that at a shelter, whether it's private or a municipal agency, because I think it just helps reinforce that culture. People want to work somewhere where they enjoy the people they're working with side by side, day by day. So thank you. The last topic I want to touch on is life-saving programming through change. Okay. And so Scott, let's start with you. How do you maintain life-saving programs in times of change, right? You don't have enough staff, volunteers can't come in the building because there's COVID, right? People aren't adopting as much. You're having a hard time placing long-term fosters. Maybe they'll foster for a weekend, but how do you maintain those programs during times of change?
Yeah, and I'm sure, especially with the COVID issue, that Lee and Shelley could speak better to that. But one of the things you really need to do is watch out for your staff and show your staff that you care. Because when we're talking about staff shortages and changes, staff can get confused, they can get frustrated, they can burn out easily. Their workloads are starting to increase, and I think it's imperative for a leader to keep an eye on staff, keep checking in with them, show them support, and at times maybe take things off of their plate. And explain to them why this isn't as much of a priority as this is, because most of the people in our industry, they want to do everything. They want to, this is going to save a life, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and they just want to take on everything, right? Especially some of those younger people that want to grow in the industry, and and all that. They want to do everything, and as a leader, it's our job to make sure that their plates aren't overwhelmed, and that becomes a difficulty for us because we have to watch our own plates, your plate, his plate, blah blah blah, and go back and forth. But it is imperative that we keep a close eye on the staff to make sure that they're not burning themselves out, because once that happens, there is no life saving at all.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. Even if you have achieved a 90% or an approximately 90% save rate, I always think of dieting as analogous to getting to a 90% save rate. You have to get there, right? But then you have to stay there. So you have to lose weight and then you have to keep the weight off. You can't gain it again, right? And it's the same thing with life saving. Shelley, what are you guys doing to balance programming while at the same time addressing those staffing shortages and possible increased intake and less adoptions?
Yeah, just like Scott said, I like his analogy, like off the plate, on the plate. We actually say that, like, your plate is only so big and you can only put so much on it. And so when there's a staff shortage, that plate gets even smaller. And so we may not be able to do any new programs right now. All that stuff can kind of get on hold for a little bit. And we just maintain and try to do the best we can with what we have right now. And then hopefully we ride the wave, and then the staff can come back on, and then we can do more. But you can only do what you can do for right now. And so we sometimes put off some programming and put off new strategies, just maintaining and waiting until the time is right.
Okay, and helping that staff prioritize their to-do list, not only what
Right.
they have to get done, but the priority order of what needs to get done is important
Yes,
too.
definitely.
Thank you. Lee, would you like to add to that? What are you doing to balance your programming at Kitsap Humane, as well as addressing your staffing shortages and possible increased intake and less adoptions?
Yeah, so we've been able to take advantage of some of the not so much staff shortages, but the lower intake in 2021. So we have veterinary services as part of our shelter as well. And when intake was down and adoptions were down, some of that was because we didn't have enough staff to do as many adoptions as we wanted last year. What we were able to do is increase our low-cost spay neuter, and we did more last year than we've ever done in the history of the organization. So we pulled a different lever, right? So it's different. It's not exactly what we thought we would do in terms of our priorities and our budget, but they kind of offset each other. And so we just took lemons and made lemonade out of that. Right now, we're not fully staffed, but we're getting there. We actually hired an LVT who starts next week, the unicorn staff. We're super excited. So this year, intake has been up and vet services staffing has been down. So we haven't been able to do as many community spay neuters, but we have been able to do more on the adoption side. So we try to just pull different levels. And then also when people leave, it's like, why are they leaving? Are they leaving because of the pay? Are they leaving because of the culture? Are they leaving because they got a great new job or they're moving? We have a lot of military staff and they move on when their spouses, get reassigned. But really look at that. And that's how we realize we've got to pay people more and we've got to offer, we got to value them more. And that might mean we're doing something less down the road, but it's so important because without the people, we can't do our mission.
Yep. Animals can't save themselves. If they could, none of us would be on this call right now. So Holly, again, we're seeing this across the nation. So any additional advice you'd like to add in terms of balancing programming and at the same time addressing those staffing shortages and increased intake?
Yeah, I think, in my world and just talking to so many different shelters, for me, the ones that have been most successful are people who can do what these guys already said, prioritize, make some hard choices about what we're not going to do. And very importantly, when you're saying distinguish between what is a stopgap triage approach versus a long-term change that you want forever. So for instance, I do know, Best Friends, we actually oh my gosh, it blew up. We said, hey, maybe right now, because for a long time during this crisis, spay neuter resources were nil, right? So we were saying, you should adopt out an animal that is intact rather than be faced with it being at risk of dying. And we put this out to, on our network, and boy, did we get hit hard with people who just were so incensed. And part of that is that we kind of, the title of the article was a little sensational. So we didn't do our own good job at change management and thinking about how we were communicating that in writing. But then when we kind of did more of a discussion around it, and again, explained the why, that it was just temporary what is the consequence if we don't do this? Well, this animal's life is at risk. So I feel like the shelters that have been doing the best job at navigating these crazy times are ones that show support, are able to make the hard choices and take things off people's plates, but also not allowing victimization to become part of the culture, because that the places that I'm seeing that are struggling, they're saying, but we're short staffed, it's so hard. And it's interesting because particularly when the leaders kind of get in this mindset, we're a victim because we're all victims of this horrible time, right? But there are creative ways that we can act and make decisions that are going to help us save the most lives possible and keep our staff healthy and happy as much as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. It all starts with your mindset, right? What you think you can or cannot do. And that's what drives action or inaction, I should say too. So
yeah, that is, and they say that William Bridges says that the most important factor for successful change is the shared belief that it can be done. And so when I see sheltered leaders say, yes, this is hard, you're not trying to, rah for the sake of rah. You're saying, we know this is hard. We understand the challenges are real and we're going to still rise above it. And it's because we're going to ask you to help us. We're going to all work on this together. We're going to do all the things that we've talked about already in today's webinar.
excellent. So we only have about 3 minutes. I have 2 more questions. The last one's a doozy. So for those of you listening in, stick around for the last one. Trust me. Lee and Shelley, quickly tell us, if you can both do it in about a minute, how you're engaging your communities in these challenging times to help continue your life saving and support you. I think it's important for people to hear what you're doing with your communities. Lee, go ahead.
Yeah, so over the last 15 months, our social media has blown up, especially TikTok. It went nuts and we have over 100,000 followers now. I don't get it, but I do go on and look at ours and they're awesome. I have to get out before I start randomly scrolling. So our voice is amplified and the work we do is amplified in the community. And we use that, right? We talk about our mission regularly. We highlight, our voice is louder. So that's one thing. We have some new communication tools also in print. We started doing a magazine that just went out and it's already paid for itself, the first issue, and it's going out to like 17,000 people quarterly. It's great. We have a story engine internally. This group meets every other week and it's all of our different departments. Like, what's the messaging we want to put out? What are our asks of the community? And then our marketing team takes it and runs with it. And then we're just, now that COVID's done-ish, we're getting back out in the community, chamber, Rotary, visiting places. We just haven't done that in years because of COVID. And then we were in the middle of a capital campaign before. So there's been a lot of internal focus and now we're turning it outward.
Thank you. Great suggestions. Shelley, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, same as Lee, with the social media. I also need all of your TikTok hacks, Lee, because we just got one and we made like 2 videos and that is time consuming. Let me tell you, like that, you need like a degree in video editing. But anyway, so we've been doing that, but I think just actually being out in the community and just attending different events, starting to kind of think outside the box on what animal control can attend. We have, they're recruiting new firefighters. And so can we go and support them in that event and just show up as animal control being there? We had a rabies clinic not that long ago and our officers, I was amazed at how many people came that recognized our officers, hey, you're the one that came pick up that raccoon last week. What's up? Like stuff like that. So they see our changes. They see that we're here to help and we're not here to just write tickets. And so just being out in the community and trying to support the different departments as well.
Thank you. All right, we are at the top of the hour. I have one last question. I'm going to let Holly and Scott start first. They can answer this, and then Shelley and Lee hop in if you'd like to. And for those of you that are on the call, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But the doozy question is, I'll just put myself out there. Sometimes I work with shelters And the culture is not healthy. It's not one of engagement. And sometimes leadership is part of that problem. And so, what advice, Holly, I'll start with you, Scott, chime in after her, do you have for leadership in terms of how to have self-reflection to ensure they aren't part of the problem? And if they are, what they can do to help improve culture and start that positive change? I think you're on mute.
Since we
There we
have not much time, and this is a doozy, I would say Google active listening and become a master of active listening.
Yeah.
If I only have 10 seconds to say it, that's what I'm going to say.
Thank you. Scott, do you want to add something in about 10 to 20 seconds?
Yeah, I think that we always need to challenge our beliefs. I've been through, I've been in this industry a long time, and I've seen a lot of changes that have made me realize that what I've always believed to be true wasn't. And I think that we always need to challenge our beliefs and just recognize whether you are someone you would follow. I look at people that I have high esteem for, and I want to try and be like, I would follow them to the ends of the earth, and I want to emulate them. And that's something that I think every leader should do, is look at, would you follow yourself?
Yeah, that's excellent
That's-
advice.
Yeah,
I think that's excellent. Sometimes you can learn from those you wouldn't follow too, right? Because you know what
True.
not to do. So I think
exactly.
there's a lesson in every type of leadership.
Right.
Shelley, do you want to add anything quickly? And Lee, I'll give you a chance to jump in for a few seconds too.
Yeah, I like to surround myself with people that think differently than me. Like if they are like radically just so different, we might argue about some things, but I like having them in my life to speak and maybe soften my heart about something, or speak to something that I maybe not have thought of before. And so I keep them real close because I need those people to really speak into my life sometimes.
Excellent. Thank you. And Lee, last but not least.
Yeah, so I think finding a peer group and working with them and saying, man, this crazy thing happened. And if they're like, oh, well, maybe you should do it differently next time. It's like getting that feedback in a safe way, whether it's other leaders that are doing work like you, or if you have a smaller team in the organization where you can kind of check in after you do something, and then give yourself grace when you realize you screwed it up, and keep working on it.
Absolutely. And 360-degree feedback can be effective too, right? Everybody gives feedback on everyone and the organization in a kind and professional way. Well, we are a few minutes past. I want to, first of all, thank my lovely panelists for your time, your wisdom, your knowledge today. Thank you so much for participating. And again, I want to apologize to the audience for our delayed start, but thank you for participating. We appreciate you, and please know that we cannot save them all without you. So thank you for everything that you do day in and day out to help us get to No Kill 2025. Everybody have a great rest of your day and week. Thank you so much. This recording will be available in about a week and a half on our website. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.